Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 8 running back rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, today's schedule is pretty packed. We're going to talk about, first and foremost, running back matchups going into Week 8 in regards to which defenses are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs so that we can identify the most advantageous matchups. Then I'll transition into talking about the rest of season strength of schedule at the running back position regarding two spectrums of time, Weeks 8 through 14, the remainder of the fantasy football regular season, and in the fantasy football playoffs, Weeks 15 through 17, in order to identify which running backs we might want to be trading for going into the remainder of the season. Then we'll go ahead and transition into talking about my top 40 running back rankings, as I'll share with you guys my thought process and opinions on each individual player, while also presenting statistics in order to justify these overall rankings. If you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, or want to go ahead and specifically travel to the strength of schedule conversation, travel down to the description. There are timestamps down there. While you're down there, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe. We're making daily fantasy football content, live streaming every single night. So for those of you guys that are interested, again, later tonight at around 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I will be live streaming. If you have any questions regarding trades, potentially even waiver wire conversation, be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with the strength of schedule conversation in regards to Week 8 isolated. I've gone ahead and collected the fantasy points allowed based on rushing statistics isolated, rushing yards and rushing touchdowns from each individual defense to opposing running backs. Thus far this season, the Carolina Panthers are the most advantageous matchup by far, followed by the Dolphins, Patriots, Cowboys, Rams, Saints, etc. These are the matchups that we absolutely want to take advantage of in regards to our running backs running the ball on a consistent basis. Now, of course, as we progress throughout the season, there are going to be some instances in which these matchups don't produce a lot of fantasy points. For example, the Arizona Cardinals, they're a pretty good matchup overall, but unfortunately last night, J.K. Dobbins was not able to find himself in abundance of overall success, even though the opportunity was there. Now, either way, we will refer back to these statistics over the course of today's episode. I also want to talk about some of the more difficult matchups over the course of a season. For example, the Kansas City Chiefs stopping running backs left, right, and center. The Baltimore Ravens doing the same. Both these teams have played very well in this overall aspect, and going forward, they should continue that success. Now, with this all covered, I went ahead and took these statistics and applied it to the rest of season schedule in order to find the rest of season strength of schedule at the running back position. So in regards to weeks 8 through 14, the remainder of the fantasy football regular season, the New York Giants running backs have the easiest strength of schedule in regards to fantasy points per game allowed by the defenses that they are facing. Again, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, Washington Commanders, Carolina Panthers, hitting a bye, then followed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Dallas Cowboys, and New Orleans Saints, allows for a 16.66 fantasy point per game average based on rushing statistics isolated, followed by the Jets, Eagles, Rams, Dolphins, Cardinals, etc. So, of course, Tyrone Tracy, who looks like he is going to be the starting running back of this team, is going to be a value. Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Kyren Williams, Achane, James Conner, running backs that are going to have more value as we progress throughout the remainder of the season. I'm presenting these statistics so that you know who to potentially prioritize in an upcoming trade. Now, some of the more difficult matchups going forward, just understand that even though the Baltimore Ravens sit at number 30, that does not mean that we are avoiding Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is a machine. Regardless of which defense he faces, he will continue to dominate on a weekly basis because of how well that offense has performed as a whole. No matchup is going to deteriorate his overall potential for success, and at times maybe he will have himself a game in which he doesn't score a touchdown, but as it currently stands, that streak continues. Now, if we continue on to the most important spectrum of time for the fantasy football season, we have the playoffs, which again is weeks 15 through 17. If you play in a week 18 championship, tell your commissioner to change that right now before you get there. But as of the fantasy football playoffs, the Arizona Cardinals, they're going to be in matchups that are allowing over 20 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics isolated. New England Patriots, Carolina Panthers, Los Angeles Rams, all top 5 matchups at the position. So you would assume that if James Conner is active and ready to go, he would be dominating and carrying teams to the fantasy championships, followed by the Buccaneers, 49ers, Dallas Cowboys, Carolina Panthers, Minnesota Vikings, etc. A bunch of incredible matchups just presenting this. Now, on the other hand, of course, we have some difficult matchups for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City Chiefs. But like we talked about before, running backs that are elite, like Jonathan Taylor, Isaiah Pacheco, even Derrick Henry at the bottom of this conversation, they will not be, completely shut out in these instances. They will still have themselves the opportunity to score, and they oftentimes will, and still be able to carry our fantasy teams regardless of the schedule that they take on. Now, obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee Harris taking on Kansas City week 17. I'm not so excited about that considering how well the Kansas City run stop has been this season. But either way, just wanted to present this for the future of the season. Now that this is all covered, let's go ahead and transition into talking about my top 40 running back rankings. Before I do so, again, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog, be sure to travel down to the description of the video today because you can click on that link. And by signing up using code Andrew and making that first time deposit minimum of $10, not only you're going to get the first time deposit offer, potentially tail some potential picks, but you're going to get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings including quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex. So for those of you interested, take advantage of the opportunity by checking out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. If in fact you are not eligible because of the map, or potentially you have used the code in the past, you can always check out the Patreon to find rankings there. Now, as of right now, going into tonight, of course, it is the kickoff or tip-off of the NBA season. For new customers, you can go ahead and take advantage of 0.5 total points from LeBron James. But what I've gone ahead and done, instead of the new customer overall special, there is a current special for all overall Underdog members that, again, as of right now, 0.5 total points for Jalen Brunson. I took that with Jason Tatum going higher on his points, Anthony Davis going higher on his points, $100 entry for $223. I think this is just an automatic. Therefore, we're trying to get back on track based on how week 7 absolutely decimated my wallet recently. All right, with this all covered, let's get into my top 40 running back conversation. Speaking of Underdog picks, I mean, when we talk about an entry, Derrick Henry anytime touchdown needs to be correlated with every single play that we make going forward. 7 consecutive weeks in which he has scored a minimum of 1 touchdown. Late in that game last night, a receiving touchdown, clutching up at the end and able to save many of the entries I made last night. But overall, again, besides the 7 consecutive games of a touchdown, we have 6 consecutive games of 90 or more total yards. I mean, when we talk about Derrick Henry, I don't think there's any other running back that I've ever seen that could have their heels on their own goal line and just have a house call every single time. Now, even though he got hawked last night, I mean, the guy is an absolute machine. He does this far too often. He is a cheat code and is an automatic start every single week based on his contributions and how incredibly well this offense has played. They take on the Cleveland Browns. Again, this is going to be a cakewalk for them. I think they're 10-point favorites going into the week. Number 2, we have Joe Mixon, who is playing like one of the best running backs in the National Football League. And for fantasy football purposes, he is one of the best running backs thus far this season, and it's not even close. Despite the fact that he has missed time due to the ankle injury that sustained in week 2, in the 3 full healthy games he has played this season thus far, he has been able to accumulate 100+ total yards and 1 touchdown in every single one of those games. His fantasy point contributions in the last 3 healthy games, 25.3, 26.2, 25.4. I mean, ridiculous numbers. Going back to week 1 against the Indianapolis Colts, again, they take them on this week, but going back to week 1, 30 rushing attempts for 159 yards, a rushing touchdown, 3 receptions for 19 yards, and 25.3 fantasy points. So if he's going to be able to once again impose his will against a division rival like the Colts, the 9th best matchup at the running back position, we're anticipating a lot of yardage and, of course, a potential touchdown within the overall scoreline of Joe Mixon within the week. Number 3, we have Breece Hall, who is also taking on a division rival, taking on the New England Patriots. Just a couple weeks back, was able to find himself a lot of success, 16.3 fantasy points against that defense, 16 carries for 54 and a touchdown, 4 receptions, 29 receiving yards, a solid overall week. But over the course of the last couple games here with the new offensive coordinator, we have really seen Breece Hall get himself far more integration of opportunity, and that's exactly what we wanted to see. The last 2 games, 5 or more receptions in each of those games. That's the first time that has happened since week 1 and 2 of this season. Of course, he is trending in the right direction and has an opportunity to take it on the 3rd best matchup at the running back position. We have seen the Patriots defense allow over 115 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown minimum to opposing running backs in each of the last 5 games. We're anticipating a lot of success for Breece Hall within the upcoming week, considering how much opportunity he is now being given with the offensive coordinator change. Number 4, to close out the S tier, we have Saquon Barkley. Look, whenever this offense wants to impose their will on the ground, they can do so. That is how good they are. Even with Jordan Mailata, the starting left tackle, out and on the injured reserve, Saquon Barkley, when given the opportunity, can dominate. 17 carries for 176 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown. Again, revenge games this season against former teams have often been successful on many of occasions. And going forward, we'll keep that in mind. But Saquon Barkley, we're anticipating him to continue to find success, continue to get himself a bulk majority of the opportunity within this offense. Again, he's taken on the 12th best matchup at the position, allowing 15.46 fantasy points per game on average on the ground alone. If we go ahead and take the total fantasy points per game allowed, including receiving statistics, the Cincinnati Bengals are nearly allowing 22 points per game to opposing running backs thus far this season. Saquon Barkley, an automatic start within the upcoming matchup. Moving on to our number 5, we have Bijan Robinson. Look, Bijan Robinson, in the last 2 weeks has been the running back that we drafted in the first round. In terms of overall opportunity share, 21 touches per game in the last 2 weeks. He has scored 3 rushing touchdowns and has been able to average a 5.4 yard per carry average in these last 2 games. Obviously, that Carolina Panthers matchup was a little bit of a springboard in terms of getting him into the bounce back conversation. And now going forward, as long as they're going to continue to give him an elite level of opportunity, he is going to deliver considering how talented of a running back he is. Not only that, he's getting himself integration within the receiving game, which continues to elevate his overall baseline of production. This week, they take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Most recently against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on that Thursday night game, Kirk Cousins went for a career high of passing attempts and passing yards. An incredible game that went to overtime. Considering all the injuries that are currently plaguing the Buccaneers, this may be a positive game script in which, of course, the Atlanta Falcons take an early lead and run out the clock in the second half. In that game last time, Bijan Robinson was averaging 5 yards per carry, could very easily impose as well in that circumstance once again against their division rivals. Moving on to our number 6, we have Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, look, Jahmyr Gibbs finally had himself a breakout performance. One to separate himself with David Montgomery. Obviously, David Montgomery got injured with his knee injury early in that game, but we heard earlier this week from the head coach of the Detroit Lions, Dan Campbell, that injury isn't going to be able to potentially slow down David Montgomery. He's going to be perfectly fine. But I'm hoping that this most recent performance of 30 fantasy points is going to lead to the overall ascension of Jahmyr Gibbs that we talked about all offseason and that we have kind of seen the coaching staff allude to over the course of the season. They're taking on the Tennessee Titans. They're quite literally 11-point favorites. This is going to be a positive game script in which they should be able to put up 40 points as an offense. And when they do so, I'm expecting Jahmyr Gibbs with at least 1 touchdown, if not more, within the upcoming matchup. Number 7, we have Aaron Jones taking on the LA Rams on Thursday Night Football. Now, again, Aaron Jones thus far this season in healthy games has been incredible. He is defying all the odds. Again, all the statistics that were built against him this offseason in regards to running back age or running backs that go from one team to another at this age typically don't find success. In fact, they decline. Thus far this season, he's averaging 19.4 touches per game and 16.7 half PPR fantasy points per game when healthy, coming off of a massive week of 93 rushing yards and a touchdown against, of all defenses, the Detroit Lions. If you can run the ball on the Detroit Lions, imagine what he's going to be able to accomplish against the Rams, who are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs on the ground. Just allowed over 90 rushing yards to Alexander Mattison of all running backs, a former Vikings running back. But either way, I'm anticipating Aaron Jones to find himself in abundance of success within the Thursday night matchup. Number 8, we have Jordan Mason. Look, Jordan Mason has been quiet as of the last couple weeks, but considering all of the injuries that have taken place within the San Francisco 49ers offense, Deebo Samuel dealing with pneumonia, Brandon Ayuk out for the season with the ACL and MCL torn, Jordan Mason should be implicated for a run-heavy script against the Dallas Cowboys. And especially considering the Dallas Cowboys, they're not great against the run. They're the 4th best matchup at that overall conversation. 18.88 fantasy points allowed on the ground alone. We're anticipating a lot of opportunity going in the direction of Jordan Mason, who quite frankly put up the most overall rushing yards amongst all running backs thus far this season against the Chiefs. He put up the best performance of them all in terms of yardage and yard per carry alone. Therefore, going forward into this week, I'm anticipating the 49ers are going to take out their frustrations on this Dallas Cowboys defense. Again, they've cooked the Cowboys in the past. The 49ers cooked the Cowboys so badly that even Jordan Mason in that game last year, when Christian McCaffrey was active, had 10 carries for 69 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown against the Cowboys. We're anticipating a lot of success within the upcoming week. To close out the A tier, speaking of the Kansas City Chiefs as of most recently, we have Kareem Hunt. Look, Kareem Hunt has been incredible. Who would have guessed that a running back off of the couch would be able to, step up and completely carry this offense? Because you would have thought that if Patrick Mahomes is having 154 passing yards, 2 interceptions, and no passing touchdowns, that they're going to lose that game. But off of the overall efforts of Kareem Hunt, he has been able to carry this offense. In the last 2 games, in terms of overall opportunity, 28 and 24 total touches, coming off of back-to-back weeks of 80 or more total yards and 1 touchdown minimum. He could have had himself even 3 touchdowns this most recent week. Takes on the Raiders, the 10th best matchup at the position. Again, with Mahomes playing as bad as he has as of thus far this season, having more interceptions than passing touchdowns, my anticipation is a continued rushing approach from the Chiefs in order to carry themselves. Number 10, we have Kyren Williams. It is definitely a tough matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. I don't care what Jahmyr Gibbs was able to accomplish. Understand that this is going to be a tough week. But when we're talking about Kyren Williams, who has had himself 6 consecutive games of 1 rushing touchdown minimum, the expectation is that regardless of the overall matchup, they're going to keep this competitive. And if Cooper Kupp is going to be active, I wouldn't expect this to be a complete blowout. But if in fact it gets to that position, Of course, I would expect that Kyren Williams and his overall efforts of being given 20 potential opportunities to at least potentially scoring once within this game and still being a relevant fantasy option. He's coming off of a great week against the Las Vegas Raiders, but again, this Minnesota Vikings defense is no joke. That being said, I do want to go ahead and throw out the stat. As a Rams fan, I'm potentially, hoping that this takes place, but we'll have to wait and see. Teams that have played the Lions this season, in the following week, they are all winless. Considering how much they get beat up against the Lions, the following week they always lose. There's even a stat that I heard the other day that even goes tracking back to last season, in which, again, once the Lions beat a team, the following week they typically struggle because, again, the Lions really take a lot out of you in order to beat them, and oftentimes you cannot beat the Lions. All right, moving on to our number 11, we have Devon Achane. There's a reason why I've told many of you guys to be trading for Devon Achane as of late. I expected him to have a solid week against the Colts. He, in fact, did. Was able to get himself 17 overall touches, but overall get himself 85 total yards, which is fantastic. And now that you have the potential return of Tua Tagovailoa, expected to play this week against the Arizona Cardinals, will be practicing. Remember that in weeks 1 and 2, with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback, Devon Achane, 14 targets, 14 receptions, 145 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. The receiving upside of Devon Achane is going to be unlocked. On top of the fact that he takes on the 11th best matchup at the running back position, we're anticipating a lot of success within the given week. Number 12, we have Kenneth Walker. Look, Kenneth Walker has been fantastic this season. He has been far, greater than I could have ever imagined. He has scored 7 touchdowns in the last 5 healthy games he has played, and now has an opportunity of taking on the Buffalo Bills, which, again, the way to attack that defense is running the ball down their throat. The Bills have allowed 4.82 yards per carry thus far this season to opposing running backs, and that has been their biggest overall weakness. Even last week, Tony Pollard was able to find himself success on the ground, despite the fact that they were taking on Mason Rudolph of all quarterbacks. Now, besides the fact that Kenneth Walker is going to find himself success on the ground, he's also going to do that through the air. Thus far this season, in the last 4 healthy games, he has scored 5.6, 9.2, 7.7, and 9.4 fantasy points in a half PPR, just isolated on receiving statistics alone. As long as those receiving statistics are going to continue to compound for 40+% of his overall fantasy points over the course of the last 4 games, we're anticipating even more upside every single week, even against the Buffalo Bills. Number 13, we have J.K. Dobbins. I understand that his overall performance last night was quite underwhelming. 66 total yards on 17 touches is not great. But again, another consecutive week, I think that's 5 consecutive, with 17 or more touches. The volume of opportunity is going to continue to be there. And even though the Cardinals were an advantageous matchup, he has an opportunity of taking on the Saints this week, the 6th best matchup at the position. We have most recently seen Denver running backs, 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tampa Bay running backs, 217 on the ground for 2 touchdowns. Kansas City, 114 and a touchdown. And Philadelphia, 147 and 2 touchdowns. Every single backfield has dominated against the New Orleans Saints. They cannot stop the run. They do not have Derek Carr. This should be a one-sided affair in which the Los Angeles Chargers are finding themselves an abundance of success from their running backs, and especially J.K. Dobbins. Number 14, we have Josh Jacobs. Look, the only reason that Josh Jacobs is ever ranked low for me is because they do not give him goal line attempts in order to score rushing touchdowns. Are they going to give him rushing attempts and receiving utilization? Yes. But in terms of scoring rushing touchdowns, it has been like pulling teeth with his overall organization and with Matt LaFleur as the primary play caller and head coach. Thus far this season, due to the fact that they refuse to give him the ball in the red zone, he has less rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line in comparison to Joe Mixon. And do not forget, Joe Mixon missed 3 weeks due to an injury. So putting that into perspective, it kind of gives you an understanding as to why Josh Jacobs' overall upside for success in fantasy is limited. Luckily, last week was able to find himself a target within the red zone that led to a touchdown. Outside of that, again, it has been tough. That being said, this week they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are one of the easiest matchups. Actually, in fact, the easiest matchup at the quarterback position. Anticipate for Jordan Love to completely dice up this defense and hopefully leading them down the field on multiple occasions and eventually giving Josh Jacobs an opportunity to run it in for an easy touchdown. Number 15, we have DeAndre Swift coming off of the bye week. Look, DeAndre Swift since week 4 has been incredible, averaging 22 touches per game. He has scored a touchdown in 3 consecutive games and has been averaging 4.8 yards per carry since week 4. You got to remember, weeks 1 through 3 was averaging 1.8 yards per carry. He has been incredible as of late, and now they take on the Washington Commanders, the 8th best matchup at the position. Not only are they a great matchup, but Jaden Daniels is not expected to play due to that rib injury. This may lead to a massive positive game script in the favor of the Bears, with Marcus Mariota on the other side potentially struggling against that Bears defense, who has been preparing for the Washington Commanders all throughout their bye week. I anticipate another solid week for DeAndre Swift within the upcoming matchup. Number 16, we have James Conner, who's coming off of another incredible performance. Again, 101 yards on the ground, 51 through the air, 16.2 fantasy points without even scoring a touchdown. That is impressive. And going into this week against the Miami Dolphins, we are hoping that this game can be a competitive one back and forth and not going to be a one-sided affair, because oftentimes we have seen this season in games in which unfortunately, the Arizona Cardinals get blown out early. The Arizona Cardinals often find themselves struggling, which, again, this offense and the engine of this offense is James Conner, so therefore he struggles. I mean, again, some of the more recent blowouts have led to 3.5 and 6.6 fantasy points in those overall losses. So hopefully, as we continue, James Conner will be on the positive end within this upcoming script, because the other 5 games that he has played, that it has been either a competitive matchup or they have outright won, he has scored over 14 fantasy points in every single one of those games in a half PPR. This is the second best matchup at the position. The Miami Dolphins are allowing over 20 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics isolated. This should be a solid week here for James Conner. Moving on to our number 17, we have Javonte Williams taking on the best matchup at the running back position, taking on the Carolina Panthers. Again, they are allowing 24.47 fantasy points per game. And we are anticipating that Javonte Williams, based on the fact that he's coming off of a week of over 110 total all-purpose yards, 88 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's the most rushing yards he has had in a single game since his rookie season. So it's been a long time coming. He finally looks like a full capacity running back that gave him the ample opportunity, and going forward, hopefully that will continue to go in his direction. Most recently, we have seen Bijan Robinson Jr., Allgeier, Bijan, Roschon, Swift, Moss, and Chase Brown. All of those running backs, all 7 of those running backs eclipsing 14.5 fantasy points against this defense. 14.5 fantasy points in fantasy over the course of the season on average is around like RB 18. I'm expecting at base minimum 15 fantasy points this week for Javonte Williams, perhaps even better within the upcoming performance, which could elevate him to the top 12 capacity. Number 18, the thumbnail of today's episode, we have Najee Harris taking on the New York Giants. Najee Harris's overall ascension has taken place. I told y'all it's going to happen. Week 6 and 7 is where he elevates to another level of running back and takes over the league. 19.2 and 16.2 fantasy points at a half PPR in the last 2 games. Back-to-back weeks of over 100 total rushing yards and 1 touchdown minimum. Even with Jaylen Warren back and with Russell Wilson at quarterback, it does not matter. Russell Wilson scoring a rushing touchdown, Jaylen Warren, playing more offensive snaps than Najee Harris. These things do not matter. He is getting the ample opportunity, and that is all that continues to matter. This week they take on the Giants, who just allowed 247 rushing yards, 2 opposing running backs, and 1 rushing touchdown against the Eagles. We're anticipating a game in which, of course, in Pittsburgh, there may be a lot of struggling offensive possessions for the Giants, which is going to continue to lead to Najee Harris running the ball down their throat for majority of this game. Number 19, we have David Montgomery. David Montgomery, again, after that injury, really began to slow down, but still was in the game. Was still relatively efficient in his overall opportunities. 9 carries for 31 yards, 3 receptions for 39, and continued to go. And like I mentioned earlier when we talked about Jahmyr Gibbs, Dan Campbell did come out and say that David Montgomery's injury is not going to limit him. Now, unfortunately, this most recent week, he did not score a touchdown, which again, like we've talked about all season long, is relatively rare. He has scored 19 touchdowns in the last 20 games he has played as a Lion. Therefore, we are anticipating him to get back on the overall horse of scoring touchdowns against the Tennessee Titans. They are 11-point favorites, and this should be a positive game script. He should honestly score himself like 10 to 12 fantasy points and just be on his way at the end of the week. Number 20. We have James Cook taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Even though James Cook's overall performance in an advantageous positive game script was underwhelming with only 9.2 fantasy points, understand that again, this week, it's a far easier matchup taking on the Seattle Seahawks than in comparison to what he faced last week against the Tennessee Titans' great run-stop defense. But taking on the Seattle Seahawks, they are the 7th best matchup at the position. They have most recently allowed 156 rushing yards and a touchdown to Atlanta Falcons running backs, 188 and a touchdown to the 49ers backs, 133 to New York Giants backs, and 118 and 3 rushing touchdowns to Detroit Lions backs. This Seattle Seahawks defense cannot stop the run. That is a given. And because of that, hopefully James Cook is going to be given an expansion of overall opportunity on the ground, while also hopefully getting himself a couple targets, because he really does need that receiving upside to elevate his overall baseline of production. Number 21. We have Alvin Kamara. Man, this one I struggled with mightily because, again, I truly do believe that he can find himself success against the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, James Conner just torched that defense last night. But with Spencer Rattler already being designated as a starting quarterback this week with Derek Carr confirmed out, it does not give me a lot of potential hope that this is going to be an automatic that Alvin Kamara finds success. I mean, he's coming off of a week of 7 carries for 10 rushing yards. That number has to drastically increase. And once it does this week, he will still be a relevant option considering, again, he is getting himself an abundance of opportunity within the receiving game. 7 targets, 6 receptions. Again, this is multiple weeks in a row in which he's been given 7 or more targets and finding himself with 5 or more receptions. Those numbers are going to be great. That's a baseline of production that we can find. But he's got to be relevant. He has to find himself yardage and hopefully falls into the end zone this upcoming week against the Chargers. Number 22, we have Jonathan Taylor. Now, I don't even know if he's going to be healthy. If he, in fact, is healthy, they may go ahead and limit him because he's coming off of an ankle injury. If you guys remember last year, after he returned from the PUP list, after weeks 1 through 4, from weeks 5 and 6, they kind of slowly integrated Jonathan Taylor back into the lineup and kind of got him as the number 2 running back behind Zach Moss. Now, again, there is no Zach Moss. There is no outright stud running back within this lineup, even though we have seen Tyler Goodson be relatively efficient. I do expect that if Jonathan Taylor is to practice and play this week, he will still be at a somewhat limited capacity in comparison to where he typically is. The most recent performance he had against the Houston Texans, 16 carries for 48 and a touchdown in week 1 for 10.8 half PPR fantasy points. We would hope that he could put together somewhat of a similar performance, if not even better, within the given week, assuming he plays. Number 23, we have Chuba Hubbard. Look, Chuba Hubbard, regardless of game script last week, 17 carries, 52 yards, and scored a clutch touchdown to save his overall fantasy production. Now, since week 3, he has been unstoppable, averaging 21 touches per game, has scored 4 touchdowns throughout that span of time over the last 5 games, and has averaged a 5.3 yard per carry average, and is going to continue to deliver. Now, this week they do take on the Denver Broncos, which is very much so concerning considering if Andy Dalton cannot find passing success against the Washington Commanders, he's not going to find it against the Denver Broncos. And if he's going to struggle against Patrick Surtain in that secondary, again, it's going to lower the overall potential for upside in regards to Chuba Hubbard, who's coming off of a week in which he broke his streak of receptions, which again is very much so alarming. Hopefully he'll get himself more utilization in that capacity because that is going to help his overall baseline floor. Number 24. Speaking of the Washington Commanders, we have Bijan Robinson Jr., who, again, like I mentioned earlier, there is a high potential which Jayden Daniels is not going to be available for this offense. And if they're taking on the Chicago Bears defense with Marcus Mariota, I wouldn't anticipate immediate success, but I will anticipate a run-heavy approach from the Washington Commanders offense. And thus far this season, they have found an abundance of success in that overall approach. Therefore, what we're anticipating this week and going forward is the potential in which we can find Bijan Robinson hopefully scoring himself a touchdown and getting the ample rushing yardage that we need to be a top 24 running back. At least 11 to 12 points is what we're hoping for. If he's able to accomplish that, we're lucky. Because again, without Jayden Daniels there, it makes it that much easier to scheme for the potential of Marcus Mariota, considering how well this Chicago Bears secondary has played thus far this season. Moving on to our 25, we have Tony Pollard. Again, I don't love the matchup. Against the Detroit Lions, we have seen 2 running backs, most recently Kenneth Walker and Aaron Jones, dominate. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could see a game in which Tony Pollard just breaks out a huge run and finds success. But regardless of that, I do want to be very careful because, again, the Lions are 11-point favorites. This is expected to be a blowout, and if in fact that is going to take place, and we're going to have the return of Tyjae Spears, and he's going to dig into the overall receiving workload of Pollard, it could lower his overall potential. Again, Pollard's still coming off of a week in which he had 22 total opportunities, 18 total touches. The opportunities and touches are going to be there. If he scores a touchdown, he's far better than number 25. But if he doesn't, in terms of yardage alone, I think this is a safe overall position against the Lions defense. Number 26, we have Chase Brown. Now, again, in my opinion, there is no question that he is the RB1. If we go ahead and just look at overall snap counts, he has outsnapped Zach Moss recently. And in terms of overall touches out of this backfield, he has outtouched Zach Moss 29-16 in the last 2 games. He is controlling 65% of the overall touches out of this backfield, which again continues to lean in his direction. And as long as those opportunities continue to go, as the more efficient back, he will truly take over at a fuller capacity, probably 75% at some point within the upcoming weeks. Now he takes on the Philadelphia Eagles. Both the Cincinnati Bengals and Philadelphia Eagles have most recently taken on the Giants and Cleveland Browns. Both these teams, watching identical film as of late, are both poised to take each other on. I'm hoping for a competitive, high-scoring game between these two teams. That is the excitement of the potential of having an offense like the Philadelphia Eagles taking on an offense like the Cincinnati Bengals. Both these defenses really cannot stop a soul, so we're hoping for a lot of upside and hopefully for Chase Brown to fall into the end zone. Number 27, we have Tank Bigsby. I am anticipating, first and foremost, that Travis Etienne will return this week. That is why Tank Bigsby sits at number 27. Because again, if it wasn't for the fact that there was a potential of Etienne returning, he'd have a significantly higher rank, just like last week. Again, Sunday morning, we had him ranked relatively high as soon as we were given confirmation that Etienne was not available. But considering Etienne practiced at a limited capacity all of last week, that means that he has a very high chance of playing this week. Either way, what Bigsby was able to accomplish last week against the Patriots, 118 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, really should continue to solidify him as the early down back for the rest of the season. Now, he will not get himself any of the receiving utilization, which again is a concern, but as long as Bigsby, again, is averaging 6.19 yards per carry, which is more than Saquon is averaging this season, and 4.57 yards after contact per attempt, as long as those are his averages, he is going to be implicated to be a fantasy relevant back. And even when this game potentially gets out of hand, once the Packers continue to take over, he's going to be the goal line back, in my opinion. And when these opportunities are given to him, he will continue to be a relevant option for fantasy purposes. Number 28, we have Rachaad White, who came back from his injury and worked right back into being the number one back of this offense. Played more snaps, had more rushing attempts, had more targets than Bucky Irving in all 3 of those categories, and that's all that matters. As long as he is still the number one back, we can trust in starting him every single week. And luckily, was able to finally get himself the receiving workload that we haven't seen since week 1. 6 targets, 6 receptions, 71 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns to top it all off. Going forward, considering all of the injuries that this offense has sustained, with Chris Godwin probably being out for the rest of the season, with Mike Evans dealing with a hamstring and probably missing the next couple games, if not more, this is going to be a game in which, of course, this offense is going to have to continue to check it down to Rachaad White to find success. Taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who again, last time out, Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards against, they're going to probably have to be in a negative game script throwing the ball for the entirety of this game. Rachaad White should be implicated for more receiving workload. Again, most recently in week 4 against Tampa Bay, had 10 carries for 72, was highly efficient in that game. So if given ample opportunity, should deliver for fantasy purposes. Number 29 is Tyrone Tracy Jr. Again, we talked about this yesterday during the live stream. Tyrone Tracy outsnapped Devin Singletary in week 7, 39 snaps to 12. In all overall circumstances, he was the preferred back, whether it's short yardage situations, 3rd down snaps, 2-minute drill, and potentially if they were to get to the goal line, he would have been the preferred back. Going forward, it looks like Tyrone Tracy has solidified himself as the starting running back of this offense. Hopefully, Daniel Jones playing an away game against the Pittsburgh Steelers is going to elevate his overall potential. Daniel Jones, his home and away splits are disgusting. He hasn't thrown a passing touchdown at home in a very long time, but on the road, he has been a significantly better quarterback, which hopefully he's going to be able to help elevate Tracy in this circumstance, considering they are on the road this week. Even taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, still a valuable back. Moving on to our number 30, we have Rico Dowdle. My only concern with Rico Dowdle is that they take on the San Francisco 49ers. If this becomes a negative game script, it could get out of hand, and Rico Dowdle could be a lesser potential opportunity guy in terms of overall rushing attempts, which would hurt his overall baseline of production. But, last week, during the bye week, we did hear Mike McCarthy, the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, specifically say, quote unquote, he definitely needs to touch the ball more without a doubt. So they want to go ahead and give Rico Dowdle more touches and more opportunities. Most recently, a couple of the games, again, 11 rushing attempts and 20 rushing attempts. He's gone up in terms of rushing attempts every single week. Zeke is pretty much out of this overall conversation. So going forward, we are hoping that not only is he going to get himself rushing attempts, but most recently, like he did against the Detroit Lions in week 6, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 30 receiving yards. Hopefully, he's going to continue to be relevant for fantasy purposes. He has scored over 7 fantasy points in each of the last 3 games based on receiving statistics isolated. As long as that is going to be within his overall conversation, he should still be relevant, even against the 49ers. Moving on to our number 31, we have Jaylen Warren. Again, Jaylen Warren, when given opportunity, will deliver. Again, he's coming off a week in which he outsnapped Najee Harris and still had himself 15 opportunities and 14 total touches. And considering this is expected to be a blowout in which the Pittsburgh Steelers are able to impose their will against this New York Giants defense and offense, the expectation is that, of course, we should see a lot of success from Najee Harris, but in garbage time, a lot of success from Jaylen Warren. We most recently saw, even Kenneth Gainwell last week was a dominating force. The backfield, even after, Saquon Barkley rested in the second half, this backfield combined for 247 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown for the Eagles. So we're anticipating Jaylen Warren to also be relevant within the upcoming week on top of Najee Harris. Number 32, we have Bucky Irving. Look, Bucky Irving is going to be the number 2 back. But what he also is, besides the number 2 back, is the goal line back of this offense, scoring a rushing touchdown last night, still getting himself receiving utilization and being efficient with those overall opportunities. Taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like I mentioned earlier, with Godwin and Evans potentially missing this week, a negative game script is in line. Most recently against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 9 carries for 44, 2 receptions for 12. So getting himself 10 plus touches is probably within the realm of possibility, and hopefully more receiving utilization in order to elevate his overall potential. Number 33, we have Etienne. Speaking of receiving utilization, elevating their overall potential, considering how well Tank Bigsby has played on the ground, we're anticipating that Travis Etienne is going to be, kind of relegated to being the third down back of this offense going forward, which again is still going to be of value. Most recently, even D'Ernest Johnson had value as a third down back for this offense in the absence of Travis Etienne in the last couple weeks. Therefore, going forward, if Travis Etienne's healthy and ready to go, again, all of last week was at a limited capacity in terms of overall practice, so he was practicing at some sort of rate. If we continue and he gets healthy, he should be in line for being a top 36 running back, regardless of the fact that he'll get less rushing attempts in comparison to what he saw last season. Moving on to our number 34, we have Alexander Mattison. Coming off of a week in which he had 26 touches, is clear and away the number one RB of this offense. He has taken over the job and he is running away with it. And now that you have Gardner Minshew as the starting quarterback, it really does help elevate his value, in my opinion, because it is going to lead to far more checkdowns than, what we potentially saw with Aiden O'Connell. Going forward, again, they do take on the Chiefs this week. It is by far and away the toughest matchup at the running back position. They're only allowing 3.2 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. The best running back performance in terms of yardage alone this season has been Jordan Mason last week with 58. We're not expecting much out of Alexander Mattison within the running game. Hopefully, he finds himself receiving utilization to elevate his overall potential. Number 35, we have Rhamondre Stevenson. Look, Rhamondre Stevenson, first and foremost, does not have a great offensive line. And then second of all, doesn't get enough receiving utilization. Antonio Gibson and JaMychal Hasty get themselves a lot more receiving utilization than they should. And as long as that is going to be incorporated, Rhamondre Stevenson's a guy that, quite frankly, I can't trust, especially taking on the New York Jets, who want to take out their anger on an offense, which, again, they have an opportunity of doing against the New England Patriots. They've already done it earlier this season. Again, Rhamondre in week 3 against New England, 6 carries for 23.3 fantasy points. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I have to start Rhamondre against the Jets this week. So if you have an alternative option, look for that, because the last time the Pats took on the Jets, they lost 3-24. Moving on to our number 36, we have Nick Chubb. Again, from what we saw last week, we saw a lot of Pierre Strong. So that means that Nick Chubb is still in his ramp-up period in terms of overall opportunities, even though he got himself 12 total touches, only was able to accumulate a total of 32 yards. So going forward, unless he scores a touchdown, it is going to be a negative game script, and he is going to be implicated to probably be on the sideline more often than not. And if Jerome Ford is healthy, he is the preferred receiving back of this offense. Therefore, we would anticipate a lesser overall week from Nick Chubb, if not a potential week in which we are completely avoiding him, considering the Ravens are only allowing 3.07 yards per carry on average thus far this season. Moving on to our number 37, we have Raheem Mostert. Again, with Tua Tagovailoa potentially returning, it will elevate the offense and therefore elevate their potential for scoring touchdowns. I mean, even Raheem Mostert had a goal line opportunity in week 7. Unfortunately, got stuffed on multiple of those opportunities on the first drive of the game. But nonetheless, if the opportunities are going to continue to be there with Tua Tagovailoa back, we would anticipate against the 11th best matchup for potential for, falling into the end zone by chance and maybe even being a top 30 running back in that circumstance. Moving on to our number 38, Austin Ekeler. Man, did he hurt me or what? In all of the weeks for Austin Ekeler to put up less than 8 fantasy points, he does it against the best possible matchup at the running back position. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense, and it is what it is. You would assume that if you're going to win 40-7, Austin Ekeler would be implicated for more than 6 touches and 4 carries for 17 yards. But hey, it is what it is. Now they take on the Bears. Without Jaden Daniels, it is not going to be expected to be an easy cakewalk for this offense. But hopefully Marcus Mariota wants to look in a direction to check down the ball to Austin Ekeler for multiple occasions over the course of this game. Number 39, we have Tyjae Spears. Speaking of checkdowns, that is quite literally the only way he will find value this week. If he gets checkdowns from either, Levis or Rudolph, it does not matter. There is going to be very little opportunity for success on the ground. Therefore, let's hope he finds himself at least 4 receptions for like 60 yards through the air. And then we move on to Tyler Allgeier, number 40. Again, considering we are anticipating a positive game script in the favor of the Atlanta Falcons, and considering all of the offensive struggles because of injuries that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may face, this is going to be a conversation in which we do anticipate Tyler Allgeier to continue to get himself more and more touches going forward late in that game, as they are potentially blowing out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Time will tell. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my video. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This encompasses our Week 8 running back rankings. of course, the matchups, and the rest of season strength of schedule at the running back position. If you enjoyed today's video, click the like button down below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. I thank you all for all the support. Again, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog or my Patreon, be sure to find those links down in the description. Until tomorrow, which we'll be talking about my top 40 wide receiver rankings. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.